not a communal person. Rensil De Silva is not a communal person. But Kurban is a communal film.
If you look at all Ray film, Roy or Tapan Sinha, Mrinal Sen, all auteur filmmaker, you will hardly find any Muslim character in their films.
The character of Baji Rao, how he's playing this Peshwa king, and it's almost the attempt to rewrite history, to set a record straight. All of these real insecurities come to the fore.
It has become a kind of war between Muslims and non-Muslims, or Hindus and Muslims. Rather, when Shivaji is the representative of Hindu community, and Mughals have become the representative of Muslim community. So it was never like that, right? It was at that time in medieval age, it was not a war of Hindu-Muslim. It was war of just capturing territories. If you look at all these recently released historical films, they are primarily carrying forward the narrative of the political sphere at this moment, what's happening, rather than they are talking about history. Bengali films, Arshinagar, Kabir, and Zulfikar. And in these three films, if you look at, either they are terrorist or they are gangster. So there is no any alternative representation where Bengalis are, or Bengali Muslims are very ordinary people, and they are going and they are living their ordinary life.
This thing about Hindutva that we talk about today, this specter that we are in the midst of, that it is something that has been going on for 30, 40 years now, and it's just that we don't talk about it, and for some reason, Modi we talk about, but we don't talk about Congress, we don't talk about previous governments, the fact that this otherization has been a constant feature of life for the Indian Muslim.
Earlier, probably it was not on your face, it was there, but now people are proud about talking about it, right?
So there is this good Muslim image in the Hindutva imagination, which is that this fellow has to pick up a gun and kill a Pakistani. Okay, so he'll be a good Muslim. There's a left imagination of a good Muslim, which is that Ambedkarism, Marxism, liberalism, Dravidianism, feminism, Gandhiism. What role are these great big isms of the 20th century playing in the 21st century? What relevance do they have today?
Number 3.
I'm an atheist in the same way as I'm an a-leprechaun.
Why have there been casteism existing in the country still today?
Feminism, by definition, the belief that men and women should have equal
So the
rights.
nature of the system is to be as mean and rotten as you can, to try to maximize profit.
I'm Sudipto Mondal,
and welcome to this episode of What's Your Ism?
Hello and welcome to What's Your Ism? I'm Sudipto Mondal. And today, we're going to try and understand the various ideological movements in India and how they impacted the portrayal of Muslims in Bollywood or in Hindi cinema. To discuss that topic with us here today, we have Dr. Nadira Khatun, who has put out this really detailed and very layered book. It's called Postcolonial Bollywood and the Muslim Identity. This is the book we're going to discuss with Dr. Nadira Khatun. Nadira, welcome to What's Your Ism?
Thank you, Sudipto. Thank you for having me in your show, and it's an honor. Definitely, we are going to discuss in detail about the book.
Yeah, and in my introduction, I said we're going to try and discuss the various ideological movements in India, and as they were playing out, how was it impacting cinema, particularly Bollywood, and in Bollywood, the portrayal of the Muslim. Right now, I was going through your book, and it's got so much material. I was just thinking about how we are aware that there are these Muslim filmmakers and screenplay writers and lyricists, and of course the actors are most visible. But when we go through your book is when you realize the enormous contribution and the large number of people from the community who've been part of the filmmaking exercise since independence. And I say it's striking, particularly because of how, despite that, the portrayal of the community has been, despite the presence of a very large Muslim creative population in the Bollywood industry. Now, before I get into your book and all of that, you must have had a great time watching all these films, right? There are like what, some 200, 300, 400 films that you watched for this book?
Yeah. People think that way, but it is not always the truth, or that's not the truth, because the people who are working uh, on films or probably doing research related to film studies, and many people, they think that, yeah, they are enjoying their time because they are watching films all the time. So, and it's not always the every film you enjoy, right? So there are films where you hate to watch, but you're supposed to watch that multiple times to analyze each and every scenes and sequences. So therefore, sometimes it becomes very tiresome, and at the same time, you just enjoy. Probably there are certain films you enjoy watching. So it's both ways, because when you are doing or critically looking at films, then you are not enjoying, actually. You are just doing the work. So even that happens to my student as well, because I teach films, and once that course is taught, then they tell that we can't enjoy film anymore, because the way we used to enjoy film, now we can't watch, we can't enjoy, because we are always thinking how to critique that. So therefore, I think when we are looking at more critically rather than enjoying, we are just trying to get a kind of sense and the criticality of it.
Hmm. Okay. So you're basically in the business of taking the joy out of watching films. Anyway,
Yeah, actually.
okay, okay. No, but the joy aside, it's when I start going into the analysis that you have made in this book, is when I understand the amount of labor that must have gone into it. Each film, each scene, pulling out those scenes which are relevant. I mean, I must congratulate you for the kind of detailing that you've gone into in this film. Now, now what I'm left with after reading your book, of course, is that what comes at you is this question of stereotyping, exoticizing, fantasizing, the fantasy Muslim, and the demonic or the demonizing effort, where you have the demonic Muslim, right? Now, these are the broad themes which you deal with, in your book. So before I get into Bollywood and how it deals with exoticization or with villainization, I wonder, because see, we are an outlet, as you might have gathered, we are a South Indian outlet in terms of most of our work is based in the South. And one of my colleagues, Soumya Rajendran, who's a pretty well-known film critic and writer, a few years ago, she pulled out this very, how do I put it, controversial piece, or a piece that got a lot of reactions, which talked about the portrayal of Muslims in Tamil cinema, and yeah, and she compared it with Malayalam cinema to make the point that in Malayalam cinema there is so much more diversity of characters. There's so much, that there is a humanization of the Muslim character, as opposed to this cardboard cutout that you see in even in Tamil cinema, for that matter. So she talks about a range of Tamil films in which the portrayal is not too different from some of the stereotypes that you deal with in your book, which is this skull cap wearing, bearded, namaz, and the moment the Muslim enters the frame, in the background the azan will start playing and things like that, right? And Soumya talks about Malayalam cinema. So my simple question to you is, have you watched Malayalam cinema? What do you think of it? What do you make of it?
I have not, very honestly, I have not watched that widely that I can comment on. So yeah, I should not be commenting on with my limited knowledge and exposure.
Okay, okay. So no, in terms of exchange, then I must recommend to you, that you must watch some
Yeah, definitely you can.
Malayalam.
I will. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but for the timing, I don't want to comment, because if I should be telling something which I'm sure and I'm really affirmative about.
Yeah, no, I gather that you will not, comment about it as a simple viewer would. You will have to get into the criticality and all of that. Fine. I was just
Mm,
asking you a layperson question, but coming to the portrayal of Muslims in Bollywood, one of the main
mm,
things we are dealing with is what the fact that this is a minority population. Just 14% of India, and in a sense, that representation in Bollywood is deeply affected by that, right? And
Hmm.
the simple point in the case of Malayalam cinema, that my colleague made was that in Kerala, 26% of the population is Muslim, as opposed to in Tamil Nadu, it's 6%. So that skew
Hmm. Hmm.
automatically, that lens, the gaze automatically is very, very different. But let's get into your book now. Okay. Uh,
But I would like to point out here, you have made such an interesting point that because of the percentage, and probably because of the percentage, and people are exposed to the other culture as well.
yeah.
And therefore, the representations are not that stereotyped. On the other hand, in West Bengal, the percentage again it's higher, because I belong to West Bengal and I'm from Bengal and I'm Bengali. I consider myself Bengali. So therefore, there, if you look at the percentage, it's more than 20% population
Mm,
in Bengal, Muslim population. But again, Muslims were never on screen.
right.
Yeah, Bengali in Bengali cinema.
Oh, okay.
So recently they have started appearing, or they have like filmmakers, they have started representing Muslims um, in a very different way. Like they are adopting the Bollywood path, and they have started representing Muslim characters like again probably terrorists or gangsters, and in that way. So it's not, I will not say only about population, or that logic always doesn't work everywhere,
Right,
because
right.
that percentage was always there in Bengal. But if you look at all Ray film, Roy, or Tapan Sinha, Mrinal Sen, all auteur filmmaker, you will hardly find any Muslim character in in their films. So
Wow.
that is really yeah. So that we need to I thought of just
No,
pointing
that's such an
out.
interesting point to bring up. I mean, can you tell me a little more about that? Though my name is Bengali, I'm Bengali origin. I was raised and born and raised in the south. So, can you give me a couple of more things about Bengali cinema? I mean, what happened? I thought, you had this Indian cinema at one point was defined by these progressive Bengali filmmakers. You had Ghatak and you had Benegal,
Hmm,
Roy, and all of that. And now
hmm.
you're telling me, and there's a lot of that reference in your book also. Okay, saying that these people, the films that they made, you talked about Garam Hawa and all these films, these progressive filmmakers with perhaps even a leftist
Yeah,
kind of inclination. And you're telling me that in Bengal, Muslims have barely found any representation in films, and Bengal has a rich film history, right?
exactly. And that's primarily probably it's because of Bhadralok culture Bengal always was proud of. And maybe because of that, though they have represented a different kinds of subaltern group, but Muslims were always a kind of ignored community again in terms of if I'm talking about film. So yeah, I don't find there are characters, probably hardly one or two characters in their films. What I have just now pointed out, the filmmakers I pointed out. And I wrote one paper on that. If I will just share with you the copy of that particular paper, and that in that paper I have discussed three recently released Bengali films: Arshinagar, Kabir, and Zulfikar. And in these three films, if you look at, either they are terrorist or they are gangster. So there is no any alternative representation where Bengalis are, or Bengali Muslims are very ordinary people, and they are going and they are living their ordinary life. So therefore, I find and that's why I thought of just pointing it out. It's not always a population number and percentage. Rather, it's beyond something. Maybe because in Bengali film industry, from historically, if you look at, there were hardly Muslims who were involved in filmmaking. So, and another important thing is that in Bengal, if you look at that, upper class Muslim were not that much prevalent. So upper class. So therefore, that they were in oblivion, or they were in oblivion. So they were not there in the scene. So therefore, they were never got a place in the on screen or in film text.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for those insights. But let's get to your book now. And you have, of course, like I started off saying, it's a very vast topic, and it doesn't seem so in the beginning, but then when you get into it, it's a very vast topic. You're talking about around 70 years of cinema, and you have divided it into different genres, right? You have this first category, which is the Muslim historical, right, where you have these historical narratives within which Muslims are placed, and in that section there is an arc you draw in terms of a timeline where you talk about how post independence there's this glut of films where you're talking about a glorious Muslim past, in which you have glorification of this Mughal period. You have these specifically three emperors: Shah Jahan, Akbar, and Jahangir. Jahangir, Akbar, and Shah Jahan are the three main, romanticized emperors of this period. You have Mughal Azam, what have you, all these films, and then in that same portrayal of the Muslim in a historical time frame, you have a radical change if you look at what has been happening in the last 10, 15 years, maybe 15, 20 years perhaps, you know uh, yeah, where you have films like Panipat and all these very feral anti-Muslim films. Now let's go phase by phase. Let's do that with this historical genre, because it's so interesting in how you break it down. For starters, let's look at why is it that just after independence, when we have had such an important historical event, which is a negative historical event, which is the partition, never found any portrayal in any of the films made post independence, even by Muslim or Hindu filmmakers. It's something that was like a bad dream which was wished away. And the reason it is perhaps important to raise it is because of how other societies have dealt with their tragedies. For instance, if you look at post World War films, and how the Holocaust and these tragedies have been dramatized, and as almost as a warning sign for future generations, completely absent from that era of filmmaking. Up until the 60s, 70s, you don't see any films focusing on that. Why do you think that happens?
I will tell you something very interesting here. Actually, this book is part of my PhD work.
Right, of course. I
So
forgot to
I
mention that. Yeah,
completed,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I completed my PhD in 2016, and my data collection was in 2013 and 14. So therefore, 2013 and 14, if you look at, sorry, 2012 and 13, actually that was my data collection period. So if you look at 2012 and 13, the socio-political situation of the country was very different. It was not as it is after 2020, 2014. So 2014, when there were a lot of change in the political space, and after that, as I didn't do any as such field work or data collection, then therefore there was a huge amount of gap, because when I have did my data collection in 2012 and 13, I just looked at Muslim representation, because at that time Muslims in historical film were not that much, because at that time it was Muslim historical film as a genre. So therefore, later on, after 2000, as you have rightly pointed out, 10 to 15 years, it started this new type of historical films. So after 2010, these new type of historical films started coming into picture. So therefore, I had to, when I was just reworking on my draft, on my manuscript, just while just correcting it and reworking, redrafting for my book publication in 2019 and 2020, I had to include, and I have had to have a kind of different lens altogether to look at historical film. So therefore, I had to do another round of data
Yeah,
collection,
yeah.
and in 2020, and
Because
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so in your book, just for the so that the readers don't get, I mean, the audience doesn't get confused. So there's this one section in your book where you're talking about Muslim historical in a completely different way. You're talking about the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. This entire magical realism almost. This romanticized portrayal, like I said, of Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and all of that. And then there's another section in that same Muslim historical where you're talking about these new age films. And I suppose, yeah, that's the data collection you're saying you had to go into and update
Yeah,
your study to include this.
yeah,
Go on, yeah.
yeah. Because therefore, I have divided this particular chapter, Muslim historical genre, into two different distinct sections. One, I'm talking about the earlier Muslim historical films, and the second one, Muslims in historical films.
Right.
And yeah, Muslims in historical films, there primarily I'm talking about the new age films, historical films. For example, just now you have pointed out Panipat or Padmavat,
Yeah.
and where Muslims are villain primarily, and villain in the sense they have certain political signs attached to it. What do you mean by political signs? Again, they are the foreigner who are coming from outside and they are trying to harm the nation through that. And a nation can be, even sometimes in Padmavat we have seen that in in terms of nation they are trying to attack women. So again, women are representing as the representative of the nation, and where men are there to just protect that women, as well as by protecting women they are also protecting the nation. So there is a term by Sikata Banerjee, she has pointed out masculine nationalism. So yeah, and that's how I have divided this chapter into two different segments.
So this first segment, that is what I was trying to get at, to go chronologically. So in the first segment, what do we see? We see this glorification of Muslim royalty, of perhaps Mughal rule, and it is somewhat part of the secular ethos or the Nehruvian ethos. It's almost like a dramatized bells and whistles version of Discovery of India. Where you have this portrayal of these emperors. What milieu do you see these films emerging from? Because they're also not based in any reality. They are this fantasy genre, right? So what kind of people or what kind of ideologies at that time do you think influenced these films? You talk about the Nehruvian socialist secular era.
Yeah.
How do you think that
Hmm.
impacted these films, and why do you think these films were made at that time?
During 50s and early 50s, I find uh, these films are primarily, of course, as you have talked about, secular ethos, and probably the filmmakers and the euphoria of the time was like you have to just put across or put out the secular ethos. And of course, because of partition, there were a lot of negative feelings towards other communities. So therefore, these filmmakers and also the state was not willing to put out some kind of more negativity. So therefore, and most importantly, we will not be only talking about secular ethos. Rather, when I was talking to Nasrin Munnikavir, and whom I have interviewed for my book, and she's telling that in India and in Bollywood, it has always been like that. When one film works, filmmakers think that we can make 10 more films like that. So therefore, when Anarkali was, even there is huge amount of doubt that Anarkali was actually existed or not. But we are seeing almost every film wherever Akbar is there, Anarkali's character is coming. So therefore, if you look at actually Anarkali, why Anarkali is suddenly added in every film as a love triangle? So you have to understand that it's not only about that putting out or spreading that secular ethos, rather you are doing business, right? So at that moment, those films were working, and definitely because they were working, they were profitable. Many such films started coming in, and they were doing great business as well. So it worked both ways. One, of course, state ideology, and the second one, definitely for the business purposes.
Business purposes and the businessmen who are behind these films, right? You yourself in your book have problematized this type of portrayal as starting with the fact that it is not representative of the reality of a majority of Muslims, not just in India but perhaps in South Asia,
Yeah.
who are not Nawabi, who are not into Shairi, okay, who are definitely not from
Yeah.
Lucknow or Awadh or speak Urdu, and are most likely the subaltern populations of these regions, and they are SC, ST, OBC converts. Today's SC, ST, OBCs. I mean, back then it was lower caste conversions that was what was that led to the swell in the numbers of the Muslims, and that large segment of the population obviously never found any representation in these films. So tell me, I mean, what was that kind of, there was some politics behind that also, right? To project that elitism, to project that Awadhi, Lucknowi, Urdu culture. What was the politics behind that? Who were the people? What was their, where were they coming from? Can we just say that it was personal, was political, because these people were from a certain strata of Muslim society and from a certain region of the country?
If we talk about politics of the representation of those kings and nababs, then uh, I believe that they were, even from the data, whatever I have got, I believe that because they were, again, if you look at the characterization of those kings and nawabs, they were good at heart, right? They were not bad people. They were not doing something bad for the nation or the country. Therefore, and they are protecting the nation in a way. Though they are kings and nababs, but they are also going for fighting, and they are going for a war. And ultimately, they are the good people, and that was the kind of euphoria, and it was a kind of ambience at that moment, political ambience at that moment. So I find because of that, those characters were actually characterized, and they were actually written, and I don't find anything else. And apart from that, of course, business part is there. Like one film worked, and then filmmakers started making more films on these kings and nababs. But ultimately, uh, and at that moment, if you look at 1950s and 60s, that was the era where, again, India was going through again depression because of partition happened, and also poverty was there. So you are not showing poverty again on the screen, right? If you are showing poverty, the people every day living their life in that way. So again, if they're going to theater and they're just again watching the same thing on screen, and that's the funda of mainstream films. Like you can't project or you can't represent whatever they are just living and their everyday life. So you have to do something beyond. And if you are just representing something that grand or that grandeur, then definitely people would be more attracted to watch those films. And so you are just laying out a kind of that grandeur life and that grandness of those films, then definitely people would be more lucrative to go and watch. And I find that can be another important part of it.
Hmm, interesting. No, I was kind of also, wrestling with these facts, and trying to figure out perhaps where this is coming from. The different things are coming up, in terms of themes. I'm thinking that this elitism that is portrayed, or this elite culture, this high culture that is being portrayed, in the name of what do you call it, Ganga Jamuni uh, Tehzeeb, right? Is also an invocation to an older order where there was a kind of a collaboration between the Hindu rulers
Mm,
and the Muslim rulers. And in
mm,
this post-independent era, in that Nehruvian era, you had, in fact, the entire Muslim political leadership in democratic India was made up of former aristocratic uh,
mm,
people. You know, they, not just in the portrayal in films, Nawabs and Sultans, but Nawabs and Sultans of various smaller, places, principalities, were actually participating in elections, seeking legitimacy, were largely part of the Congress. The Congress was essentially,
mm,
made up of the ruling class elite from both these sections. So in terms of,
mm,
perhaps an ideology of that time, because filmmakers, throughout the book, we get to get a sense of how keen, how instinctive they are about where the penny drops and how which side of the toast is buttered, and the fact that there is this political climate in India in that period where you have, the ruling elite of both these communities continuing to rule India, and this
Mm,
justification of that rule perhaps coming through cinema.
mm.
This is just some, my own jugglery that I did in my head, perhaps. How do you see this? Do you think it makes sense?
Yeah, that was, I find Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb, what you are saying, I find that is more applicable for Muslim social genre, particularly, where we are just seeing a kind of confluence of both the cultures, and we are looking at that how Urdu is glamorized, and that Nawabi culture is more, uh, it is getting highlighted, and where Nawabs, they don't have anything else, they are only left out with the cultural aspects. And Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb talks about that cultural fusion primarily. So therefore, I find that particular element is more applicable for 1960s, late 1960s and 70s, that particular era, rather than 50s, where we are directly talking about kings and rulers, and who are primarily Mughals. Yeah, and I think it is not, they again, by doing so, again you are exoticizing this entire community, right? So once you are telling that we are representing them in a very nice way, and we are glorifying these rulers, but you are leaving out majority of the Muslims, or Muslim population. So then, what about the ordinary Muslim population who are not kings and nawabs? Um, so I find that's how I criticized also in my book, that it's all Muslims, either they are exoticized, or they are the villains or the enemy. So they are not in between. They are nowhere in between, and they are not ordinary. So yeah.
And I almost see these films, these films of the last 10, 15 years, as a kind of a violent rejection of, almost as though these films are speaking to those films of 40, 50 years ago. When you look at this, the character of Baji Rao, how he's playing this Peshwa king, and it's almost the attempt to rewrite history, to set a record straight. All of these real insecurities come to the fore. Insecurities not just about an era where there was a war between a Peshwa and a Muslim king, but also perhaps, with these films of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, the Mughal Azams and the what have you, the Anarkalis, right? This film, for instance, I'm just going to read out a section from your book, where you describe a scene. So Baji Rao Ranveer is shown on horseback leading his troops, the voiceover narrating that the sword of the Peshwa was like lightning. His willpower was like the Himalayas. His presence embodied the strength of the Brahmins of Chitpavan, the caste group to which the Peshwas, of course, belonged, and his vision was to hoist the Maratha flag in Delhi. Later, Bajirao delivers an inspirational speech to his army to motivate them and says, "अपनी धरती अपना राज छत्रपति शिवाजी का एक ही सपना हिंद स्वराज." No, Hindu Swaraj. Okay. And of course, historically, there are so many ironies here, because the Peshwas and the Marathas and Shivaji and Peshwas rule were very different. The Peshwas, but nevertheless, they've mixed all of this here. But what I feel, is that the character, speaks of a great insecurity, right? Of setting something right, going back in time and setting something right.
Now in these, very important point it is actually. If you look at all the recent historical films, what you are doing, you are actually uh, trying to make myth as history, and and historicization of myths. are happening. At the same time, you are rewriting history. So it has become a kind of war between uh, Muslims and non-Muslims, or Hindus and Muslims. Rather, when Shivaji is the representative of Hindu community, and Mughals have become the representative of Muslim community. So it was never like that, right? It was at that time in medieval age, it was not a war of Hindu-Muslim. It was war of just capturing territories and or saving your territory. That's the thing. But even Shivaji, he in his battle or in his army, there were a lot of Muslim generals and they walked. But and there was, and of course, if it is Hindu Muslim, and even in Mughal army, there were a lot of Hindu generals and army generals. So it's not like Hindu-Muslim war happening. Now you are contextualizing this thing in the contemporary context. And you are just, and that's where the concept of heterotopia comes in. And that's the concept by Foucault, Michael Foucault. And he tells that um, you are contextualizing something in a very different context altogether. So you are in medieval age, you are contextualizing in the current age. And the film I was referring to, Tanaji, that's the film.
Tanaji, the, no,
And
okay, yeah.
yeah, where Rajat Devgan is promoting the film, and on Twitter he is writing 16th, probably the date he is writing, 16th April or something. I exactly don't know. I don't remember at this moment. And he is writing that there would be surgical strike on 16th April or something. And there are, if you look at again, for example, uh, the concept like in Padmavat, where Rani Padmavat or Padmavati, Rani Padmavati actually, she is actually trying to save her honor and she is trying to protect herself, and ultimately she is killing herself, right? And in that, if you look at, again, I wrote one paper, Love Jihad, on Love Jihad and Bollywood, and there I critically looked at how this entire narrative is connected to the whole idea of love jihad. Like you, one person from outside coming and invading your spiritual space, and which should not be invaded by the outsider. And therefore, if you look at all these recently released historical films, they are primarily carrying forward the narrative of the political sphere at this moment, what's happening, rather than they are talking about history, though they are telling that these are historical films, but ultimately how much history is there, that we need to question.
Right. Now, apart from the historical, you have these Muslim social films, and I think, you really there are some films in which kind of overlap the social and the historical. The point, nevertheless, is that these films, which were again pre 70s, I want to understand from you the kind of impact it had on Muslims, viewing themselves as the exotic, viewing themselves as the fantastical, as the slightly, how do I put it, magically real. There is this
Mm.
shairi, there is this, these chandeliers, and you have the chick, and all of this. In the mind of the of average Muslim viewer, you think, what kind of self-imagery was created as a result of this? Do you think there was a certain kind of a delusionary self-image created as a result of this among Muslims? You had films like Pakiza, you
Mm.
have like Chaudhary Ka Chand, and all these films in which they portray a certain kind of uh, way of
Yeah,
life, let's call it.
I think like Muslim historical, Muslim social is also another exotic genre where Muslims are reduced to only their luring tawaif, or they're probably they're there to just enjoy their life, or they're probably involved in shairi and sandalias, as you have rightly pointed out. And most importantly, I find there one important thing which we need to highlight, the Tawites and their representation. Um, if you look at the kind of representation uh, we have noticed in those films, actually Tawites are not really the way it is represented. And most importantly, Tawites were primarily, they were just the educator of soft skills, right? And they were independent lady of that particular time, and they were financially, socially independent. But and they of course there are some, probably some of them, they were not happy with their profession, but there were many who were very happy with their profession, because there are a lot of research which is done, and where Tawites, they have claimed that we are the most liberated women, and this because at that time the social situation or socio-cultural situation was not like today's. Women were not that liberated, but the wives, they were very much liberated, and they were having their own livelihood, they were having their own life. So there, but in the film, if we look at, they are all oppressed, they are forced to join in the profession, and also they are there just to entertain people, yeah, rather than educating them, right? So there is a difference between educating and entertaining. And they are desperate to leave their profession in the film, we have noticed.
Because
And
there's always this one
some,
male protagonist who's trying to,
yes,
almost
yes,
in love
yes,
with
trying to
them,
save.
trying to save them. Not sure if he's in love with her, but he can make a respectable woman out of her. These are the kind of tropes that are created around the wife, isn't it?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So therefore, ultimately, they are not getting the life they desired for, and or they aspired for, and so therefore, they are finally they are just showing the demise of that particular Tawai, because they went off track. Uh, and so that is also a kind of very the representation is grossly wrong, I find somewhere, because when you are representing almost 90 or 95% the same kind of representation, that means you are representing it wrong. So you are not showing any true, if you are not showing even a certain percentage as the true fact or true sense of the way they used to live, I find that's a kind of, again, a problematic representation. And of course, the way Nawabs, they were a kind of exoticization happened, and the same, and that is a kind of not right representation. And same thing happened with the Tawites in that particular era. So if you look at that, that was the era, late 60s or 60s and 70s. Like any other person, even Muslims, they also faced a kind of huge amount of economic crisis, right? Poverty, unemployment, and other things. And we are hardly seeing the films, like at least we have seen some other films like Do Viga Zameen or other films, but we are not seeing Muslim characters in and their hardships during that particular time. Rather, we are telling that everything is perfect, and you are the Nawabs. So that is also somewhere I find a problematic kind of representation.
Hmm. Hmm. But in what ways do you think it impacted Muslim culture in India? Because we know that cinema, is a big vehicle for culture. There's a section in your book, I think Asghar Ali, engineer, he talks about how these films deluded the ordinary poor Muslim into believing, ha, hum bhi sultan the. you know, you know.
Yeah,
Do you see?
even Javed Akhtar also pointed out, Javed
Hmm.
Saab also pointed out that even the person who is probably the mechanic who is fixing the cycle, and he is also watching that Mere Ghar Pe Bhi Chandelier Hai. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I really don't know that. I really don't know, because that was a different era altogether, and
yeah.
I did not do any field work at that particular
Of course
time,
not. Of
and
course
I
not.
have not, yeah, yeah. So what people felt about those films at that era, I really don't have any understanding of it, because
Yeah.
that was the era where I have not come across any research where people have done empirical work and they are talking about that, how
Hmm.
people felt about these films and about these texts. But as we don't have any literature on that, so really it is very difficult
But I
what
think we
people
can
felt
guess.
about those texts.
I suppose we can guess at least what kind of impact it would have had is one aspect, but also what intention, what kind of intentions or motivations were behind it, right? There's a certain kind of, this is how, we talk about hegemony, right? We talk about how, even today when you have these glorious portrayals, these portrayals of a glorious past in which supposedly, gold was sold on the footpath and we were this what sone ki chidiya and all of that, and you have these kings of the past, in the hindutva scheme of things, right? In these hindutva films you have these kings and all that, and what does that leave the ordinary struggling working class hindu believing? Ki my ancestors were rolling in gold. Right. And I suppose that is the intention of a hegemonic structure, right? To kind of make
Mm,
the hegemon and his culture most often, seem representative of the larger culture, perhaps,
mm,
you know.
mm,
But
mm.
a film,
Maybe. Mm,
yeah, but a film that you kind of bring up repeatedly in the course of your book as an example of great complex cinema in terms of how Muslims have been portrayed is Salim Langda. Salim Langde pe
yeah.
Matro.
Mm.
And for your sake, I watched that film actually. I've I had watched it many years ago. I just remember some scenes, when perhaps it must have been coming on Doordarshan or something. I might have watched it as a kid or a teenager, but I watched it again for this interview. I have some impressions, but I want to know yours first. I mean, what is it about that film do you think that stands out? Salim Langde Pe Matro was a film, of course, released in 1990. It was funded by
Mm.
the film corporation. So
Mm.
one of the things that they say about films like Garam Hawa and Salim Langda is that if the funding hadn't been made available by the government, such films perhaps wouldn't have ever been made. But Nadira, your impressions of that film.
Uh, I even that's I have written also that there are, of course, amidst of all these exoticization, there are certain films which have represented Muslims in a very much more sensitive and in realistic way. And what just now you have pointed out, Salim Langde Pe Matro, that's one of the films. And also there are few more films later on related to that, like Garam Hawa, that those came out, and where we, for the, I think one of the first times we have noticed that ordinary Muslims and they are not anymore like exotic others, rather they are the, like, me and you, any other human being, ordinary citizen, and they are facing also ordinary problems. They are not having exotic problems. So, yeah, those, but again, having said that, these are the rarest films which we have noticed in Bollywood film history. And those are even not number of films are very less like that.
Just that in the film, it is dealing with an ordinary Muslim against the backdrop of some extraordinary political developments. It's a film which appeared in the year 90, but it is talking about the decade that went before that, that passed before that, and it's a decade of communal strife. And the character Salim,
Mm,
in the film. He's grappling with these issues. There are scenes in which he's fighting with his father, and his father is asking him to get a decent job, and he says, and this guy is of course a tapori or a tough in the neighborhood, and he says, Musalman ko kaun job deta hai, or who gives a job to a Muslim. And this is a film which appeared way back then, and so many of these themes that the character is struggling with are so contemporary, which is
mm,
what
mm,
I felt made me. I think it reminded me that communalism did not start with some Narendra Modi character in 2014. That it predates even the demolition of the Babri Masjid, and there was this entire build up towards the Babri Masjid, if you can say, in these years of the 70s and the 80s. Um, One very important dialogue he says over there, when there is this atmosphere of a riot building up, and the mohalla is under threat of a riot, and he says, his father's again, he's arguing with his father, and he says, आखिर में गुंडे ही बचाएंगे. The cops are not going to come to save Muslims here. जिनको तुम गुंडा मवाली कह रहे हो, the ones who are calling गुंडा मवाली, those are the people who are going to come and save the community. There are these very, very sharp, poignant lines in that film. So at some level, don't you think that this thing about Hindutva that we talk about today, this specter that we are in the midst of, that it is something that has been going on for 30, 40 years now, and it's just that we don't talk about it, and for some reason, Modi we talk about, but we don't talk about Congress, we don't talk about previous governments, the fact that this otherization has been a constant feature of life for the Indian Muslim. And Salim Langda, I think, speaks about that more than anything else, don't you think?
I was not. Thanks for breaking down the films, breaking down the film, because I was not. Because that film is one of my very close to my heart, and again, the narrative of the film actually most applicable in today's age. Even, of course, at that time also it was important and it was applicable, but it is more applicable in today's age, I find. So if you look at earlier, of course, you are absolutely right when you are pointing out the socio-political fabric was not very different in 80s and 90s. Probably now we are talking about it, but earlier it was there. Earlier probably it was not on your face. It was there, but now people are proud about talking about it, right? People are proudly saying that we belong to certain religion and we are proud about it. And also, if we are like if you look at the political delegations, or most importantly the election campaigns and the kind of uh, political parties and the leaders, they are coming and delivering the kind of lecture. So it's so obvious, and it's because it was never there that a politician is coming and telling that hum katenge, right? Or we will kill. So it was not there, though it was there in a different form, but it has got that legitimacy, right? Somewhere, that if we are telling that katenge, then also it is fine. It's okay because we are victimized for last years or last multiple decades, many decades. So now we can just kill the people from other community as well. So that's the difference happened. Now it has become legitimate. Earlier it was not officially legitimate. And when you are talking about the funding was by the state, and uh, that's why the film was possible to make. Now, do you think that any such funding would be possible for a filmmaker to do such film to talk about? So that you have pointed out the difference between then and now. So now you can't think of any representative of the government is giving the funding to make a film to highlight certain issues. So, of course, the social fabric was not, I will not say everything was perfect at that time. Yeah, of course. Because if you look at from 1970s, from the time of Rath Yatra and later on 1980s, and by the end, late 1980s onwards, of course, we know what happened, Babri, and later on the riots and more damage to the social fabric, and then it's going on, keep on happening. Then terrorist attacks. And of course, once you got the enemy of the nation, then because if you look at till 1980s, you have Gabbar Singh or Mr. Mogambo Khuswa, or that Mr. India, the villain, Mogambo or Gabbar Singh, they were the villains. And they were the villains for a particular group of people or for a particular village. But after 1990s, you if you carefully look at, the enemy image got changed, right? So it was not a villain anymore, it was a kind of enemy of the nation. So through terrorist attacks, you were just trying to harm the nation. So and that's what the difference happened. And of course, it is hap keep on happening, and we are here today.
Right, right. There's another thing that I picked up in that film, okay, and I don't know if I have a problem with it or not, but it's an observation. You know, you talk about a socialist era and a government-sponsored film of that era, and there's a section in that where Salim Langda has a sister who is to be married away to this very erudite, shero shairi kind of person, who is a proofreader in an Urdu newspaper, dressed in a proper kurta pajama, lives in a small room full of books, is an intellectual basically. Okay, and that person becomes a trigger for Salim's awakening, where he realizes what the political situation is, what it means to be a Muslim in India, vagera, vagera. But through this character, it seems to me that the state is speaking to Salim, who this intellectual guy, appears to me to be the state speaking to this character, and the state is telling him what कि मुसलमानों में प्रॉब्लम है, औरतों के एजुकेशन का प्रॉब्लम है, हमारे में मवालीपन ज़्यादा है, गुंडे, दिस चौल की ज़िंदगी, अनपढ़, basically, it is not like the left or the socialists do not have a problem with the Muslim identity. And we see this coming up repeatedly, and of course in post 9/11 it has been framed as another form of Islamophobia, where there is this imagination of the backward or the pre-modern Muslim, and in the Salim Langda film, which is this great leftist, socialist, non-communal film, again there is this character who's coming and very patronizingly, like a daddy character, coming and telling Salim Langda ki, padhai important hai, ladkiyon ka padhai important hai, community should improve. Don't you see that as slightly problematic? The way the left also looks at Muslims as good. So there is this good Muslim image in the Hindutva imagination, which is that this fellow has to pick up a gun and kill a Pakistani. Okay, so he'll be a good Muslim. There's a left imagination of a good Muslim, which is that should not be very religious, should not wear a skull cap or a beard, should the woman, if she is a good Muslim, should not wear a burqa, vagera, vagera, vagera. So do you see that as problematic a little bit?
That's the problem with the ideology itself, right? Because again, when we talk about modern, who is modern? So that's itself, it's a problematic concept. If you are modern, then you have to be Western modern. Otherwise, there is no other version of modern, right? So, what is Western modern again? Western modern is someone who is educated, that like traditional education. It's not, again, what is traditional education? Again, we are following the footstep of Western education. So it's not if you are educated in madrasa, then also you are not educated actually. You are not modern then. You are again backdated. So again, if you are wearing burqa, then you are subjugated, and because again, it's not in the Western discourse, it's not going along with. So again, as you have rightly pointed out, that again, left imagination, it's more equated to Western modernization, and that's where the problem comes in. And at having said that, again, I find the film actually tried to balance both the things, like the issues they are facing outside and the issues they are facing inside. So like it's not that they are facing outside problem, rather they have inside community also there are a lot of issues. So I find somewhere it talks about that issues as well. So it's not that all the issues they are talking which are not valid. There are certain issues, they are inside issues they are talking. There are certain issues which are again one needs to highlight when they are critically representing or narrating something.
Okay, so last point about that I picked up from Salim Langda. Okay, and this made me wonder about another political issue, which is that so there are these riots happening. People are getting stabbed, and the news is coming that innocents are getting killed and all that. And suddenly there's a scene in which a dead body is getting fished out of a gutter, and the person pulling the dead body out of the gutter is, of course, uh, you know, from a caste who is, a conservancy worker, most likely a Dalit, who's gone down that drain and has pulled out this body. And I don't know. I mean, I wasn't very. It was very slightly, uncomfortable to watch the portrayal of that character. Given that it was a film in which the filmmaker was a Muslim, the thematic, influences are all, in a sense, progressive. I would have expected a slightly more sensitive portrayal of a Dalit character, and that made me wonder about a larger thing, which is that today we talk about the two most marginalized communities in India, Dalits and Muslims. But the marginalization of Muslims is of a different kind, and particularly when you talk about Bollywood and Hindi cinema, there has been a certain, in terms of the percentage of population, they've been overrepresented in Bollywood in a sense, right? In terms of different, in different sections of filmmaking, whether it's direction, production, acting, what have you, all of it. And, in this, perhaps there's a need to also look at how the Muslim filmmakers or this entire gamut of people have portrayed other marginalities, not just only Muslims. It's perhaps, I'm just saying that, as one of those things of interest going forward, as something which has some scope, it will be interesting to look at how one marginalized community, which had some bearing in a very big industry, how it looked at other marginalities is something, I suppose, for the future. But in your film, in your book, I have one last thing. I mean, we've run out of time. I mean, it's beyond an hour now.
If I can,
Yeah.
if I can add something to that,
Yes, go
what
on.
just now you have pointed
Yeah.
out, yeah, definitely, you have rightly pointed out that Muslims and Dalits, they're the most marginalized communities, and probably if you can say it. But Muslims are represented, another community is just, it's completely just wiped out from the screen.
Yeah.
And the way I started my conversation about Bengali cinema, right? I that I find it is only possible if you are involved in filmmaking.
Yeah.
If you are, for example, if more Dalit people are coming and joining in the industry, then only you can
Yeah.
talk about, because that's what I have noticed in Bengali film industry. Though Bengalis, they call themselves, they are the most secular, they are the most liberated, they are the most probably progressive. But ultimately, what you have done to popular culture and how, and the auteur filmmaker whom we worship, what you have done, like you major chunk of one of the most like who are of course 20 more than 20%, that means you can't forget about them. So you forgot to mention and you are not representing them at all. So therefore I find, because Muslims were always involved in filmmaking in Bollywood cinema, and primarily because of their language. And if you look at historically, they joined film industry because they knew after talkies, and they thought that Urdu can be a kind of medium of language, and that Urdu language we can use for films, because talkies, and we have started with talkies. So therefore, as Urdu was the language, again, a group of Muslim people, it's not, again, there is a misconception that Urdu is a language of Muslims. No. So, but
No,
there are
and
large segment
just
of
for the record, Urdu is a combination of Persian and Sanskrit. So
yeah.
it is a language, a hybrid, which is a result of two ruling classes interacting with each other. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah.
So, and because there are a good segment of people, Muslim people, they knew the language. So therefore, it was easier for them to join in the film industry as a writer. Mainly, they started their journey as a writer. Later on, they came into filmmaking because initially it started with Farsi and Farsi theater, and later on they started these Muslims they joined in. But as you rightly said, that Dalits representation we are not seeing, but again, because you don't have like people, Dalit people, once they come and they join, then only there will be some representation, like Bengal. Beng Bengalis, there was no Muslim who could join in Bengali film industry. It was a kind of Bengal. It was always the Bhadralok and the middle class Bhadralok that network worked, and like Sukumar Rai, Satyajit Ray, and that lineage is going on, and it's very difficult to just break that lineage and just joining in that network. I think that is the problem with the other marginalized community, that Dalit, where we are not seeing the sensible, sensitive representation of the community. So it's more of a like top-down approach where if you are representing, then also you are representing from your perspective, upper class, upper caste perspective, not the insider's point of view coming into picture. And as it is very top-down view, so therefore it would be always like if there are some alternative filmmakers are making, then also it would be like a very you are saving the community, or savior syndrome will come in. Like you are coming of some upper caste, upper class people, for example, Article 15. So where you will, or Jaivim, where from outside English educated, upper class, upper caste, someone is coming and trying to save that particular group, or trying to be savior of that particular group. So therefore, I find that is only possible insiders' viewpoints only will come if you are actively participating in the filmmaking.
I'll pick up on that word. Okay, this actively participating in filmmaking, and the passively allowing your instincts to inform your creative process. Okay, why am I saying this? And this is a last point that I want to discuss with you. I want to get your reflections on. I want to take you to what page 132 of your book, in which you are quoting Javed Akhtar. Okay, now Javed Akhtar is being asked about these little Muslim characters who find a place in his films. These Kareem Chacha kind of characters. And when he's asked about that, his answer is, he was asked whether it is some great secular ideology. Were you like progressively influenced because of which you created these characters? And our man says something so simple. He says, we were blissfully unaware of any socio-political relevance of these films or the scripts. Blissfully unaware. We were trying to write an interesting script. That's about it. A script which will be appreciated by the audience, which will interest the audience. That was the only consideration. So you have, Javed Akhtar over here talking about how, it came without thought. It was just one of those things which made sense. कि ये डालेंगे picture में तो picture चलेगा. Okay, it's an instinct kind of a thing, a passive thing where you're not actively being very, creative or whatever. It's just something that comes to you instinctively. And then, in page 188, you deal with this film called Qurban. Okay, Qurban is a film in which, it's a Hindu-Muslim love story in which, against all odds, the girl who's Hindu gets married to this guy who's a Muslim. The girl's father also goes on to say कि तुमको सही में प्यार है तो जाओ, kind of thing. And then that Muslim character turns out to be a terrorist. Okay, and the whole family is involved in terror and things like that. And who has made this film? The director is Rensil D'Souza, and the producer is Karan Johar, right? And the thing over here again is this instinctive thing, right? Unthinkingness of the creative process, where Kabir Khan is another interesting filmmaker. So he's commenting on this and saying, Karan Johar, the film's producer, is not a communal person. Rensil De Silva is not a communal person, but Kurban is a communal film. Right. Now, in the previous example where I was trying to look at how Javed Akhtar and how his filmmaking process, he's not being a secular person. He's just being a dhandawala or a person who has some instinct about what story will sell. In this case, Karan Johar and Rensil also seems to be just led by that instinct. What does that say about the creative process, A? And what does it say about the dangers going forward? Because these are people evidently who have some kind of a real barometer, a kind of a wind vane. They have a sense of what the people will like. And we know what political times we are living in today. If these filmmakers continue to make films based on these instincts, what kind of times are we entering? And start with answering that first question. Is the creative process just an alpha male's imagination of the world? Somebody who comes from privilege, somebody who has some instinct, knows how the marketplace works.
I completely don't agree with the whole concept of instinct. Rather, I believe in business more.
Business instinct?
Again.
Business instinct.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's so fascinating. Yeah. So, yeah, I find for Javed Akhtar, they were the writers, and if you look at his filmography, the kind of Salim Javed, the kind of this duo, the kind of films they have written, and I think they had that confidence that we will write and it will somewhere our writing would be so good that the film will work. So we will make a Chacha character, and later on, if you look at again, there are multiple films there, you will find that Chacha character.
Yeah. I think A.K. Hangal played some 5 characters in which he was Rahim Chacha.
Exactly. I have mentioned that in the book. Yeah. So, there the creativity is more of it was limited to writing and the expertise in writing. So I find more than socio-political influence, that time it was more of a like we will tell a story. And the as you are in South and you know that Tamil film industry, the way though they are making masala films, but ultimately they are giving a story in that, right? But in Bollywood, what's happening? People are before writing probably the story, they are thinking that these are the indicators we are going to put across, and then they're probably going to write the storyline. So what are the indicators? Probably terrorism for example, Kurban. Terrorism is one concept we are going to inculcate. And then another thing, interreligious marriage we are going to put across. There, that would be the love story. So that's how I think now more than the creativity and the writing expertise, it's more of a like it's a formula. These are the elements which will do great business at this moment because of the socio-political fabric at this moment is such this will work. So therefore, I think there is a I will be doing a crime if I'm comparing Javed Akhtar and this filmmaker just now we were talking about. So no, I will not compare these two.
Okay, but so this business instinct, business sense, how the politics, the political economy has an impact on films, on creativity, vagera vagera. We're living in the times of Hindutva. We're living in the post-truth world. All of that, and yet, how do you then explain the success of Pakistani serials in India? We are talking about the Muslim being villainized, being demonized, and all that, and then you have these beautiful stories coming in from across the border. You have Humsafar, then what is that other one, Dhoop Ki Diwar, what is that, Z Zindagi. My parents are hooked to some
Mm.
Pakistani
Mm.
serials and things like
Oh.
that. Yeah, and I was like, why? I mean, they're not particularly, I mean, of course, they are not communal or anything like that, but they're not like flag bearing people like us, And they're like, no, these
Mm.
stories are so fantastic, and a lot of the flaws that you speak about in the portrayal of Muslims in Bollywood or in Hindi films and things like that uh, seem to be absent from these Pakistani serials, where they're not playing Islamic characters. They may have a Muslim personate name, but they're living normal lives and things like that, and they're so popular. And the language is Urdu or a Punjabiized Urdu or something like that, And I find it fascinating how successful they are and how many people watch them in places like Gujarat, Maharashtra, places Uttar Pradesh. You imagine, and this is obviously the numbers that are coming in. It can't only be Muslims who are watching, you know. So I don't know. That's just a little
That's a
thought I'm
very
throwing up there.
interesting phenomena. Yeah, that's a very interesting thing you have just now pointed out. I think people are more fond of content rather than
Hmm.
the politics of it. And therefore, if you look at then, for example, film like uh, Ram Setu or
Hmm.
uh, Adipurush and other films, they haven't done horribly bad. They would not have done horribly bad, right? If only people are looking for or they're trying to watch these kinds of
A
narratives.
lot of these films
Or
flop,
even
right? A
for
lot of
that,
these Sangi kind of films flop very badly.
exactly. Even if you look at film recently released, I think, or not released yet, Kangana Ranaut's Indira Gandhi Prime
Hmm. Hmm.
Minister, related to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, one film he is coming up with. So therefore, it's not. Sorry, yeah, you
I'm
wanted
just
to say
thinking,
something?
I'm wondering aloud, could it be that the money has become communal, that the producer has become communal, and there is a certain logic that has been created, like, in the share market, it is rumors which create value or devalue, right? And bus इसी पे पैसा लगाओ must be the sentiment in the Hindi production.
Hmm.
That's this thing, because every person who's trying to deal with a mass audience, even a newspaper editor, would say readers don't like this, and one of my mentors in journalism was Mr. P Sainath. He used to supposedly, when he was a young reporter, he used to shoot back at his editor saying that, when was the last time you went and met your readers? you know and
Yeah.
and today in alternate, what we call as alternate media spaces, right, we are writing and publishing stories which are going viral, which are being read by thousands and millions of people. So if you say that there is no demand for secular reportage, for secular commentary and analysis and things like that, that's also not true. So I suppose, I don't know, I'm just inviting you to kind of reflect on this success of Pakistani
Yeah.
serials shows
But
that.
having said that, I must tell you again, I was writing a paper, and there I was trying to find out the 2023 the films which are released and what kind of business they have done. I was just listing down the films of I probably listed down 20 films, and there I have noticed that two films they have had a kind of maximum return. These two films, one is Kerala Story, and the second one is Kashmir Files. Probably one has invested 26 lakhs, 26 crore, and got the return of 280 crore, something like that. And the second one also quite similar. So therefore, again, it's like lag gaya to lag gaya. It's like that. So probably if there are again, as I you have superstar like Akshay Kumar and again Saif Ali Khan, and you are having miserably bad box office collection. Like as I mentioned, these two films, Ram Setu and Hadi Purush. So therefore, I you never know, and probably it's the now the market and everything is so volatile, which will click and which will not. But again, at the same time, if you look at Kerala Story, though the content is problematic, definitely, but there is a very strong, tight-knit or very good narrative in the film you have, and that will keep audience very tied up with that particular, or tell audience to come and watch, because you have a kind of thrilling experience, because it's a kind of thriller when you are watching Kerala Story. So therefore, and on the other hand, when you are watching Kashmir Files, you are telling it's a history, and again you are showing riots and other things. Then definitely it's again a different kind of thriller. So ultimately, if you are a good storyteller, even till it will work and it will do good business. So therefore, storytelling was there earlier, and the film really worked because of storytelling, and even today. But what kind of storytelling is happening, that we need to question. So even probably Kurban would have done really well, though it has done moderately well. Probably even Adipurush would have done really well. But if there are those, the flaws would not have been there. So, I, until and unless you are doing miserably bad things or adding things, then these films also will do good. If you are making a disaster kind of content, then definitely people are also upset with. So, yeah.
Hmm. And one thing we can definitely say is that the quality of propaganda films in terms of the storytelling has gone up. You know, these slick videos of military, operations and things like that. But I'm afraid I'll have to leave it there, Nadira. This has been an
Yeah.
interesting conversation. I hope to pick this up again. And before I go, actually, I want to invite you to perhaps consider writing for us. These are some very interesting insights that you have. As you know, News Laundry, News Minute, we work together now, and our articles are shared across these two platforms. And if you are looking to read more of Nadira Khatun and her film analysis, do please write in. You have my email ID. It is sudipto@thenewsminute.com. So if you'd like to read an article by her, if there's any specific topic on which you'd like her to write, do please mail in and tell us what you would like to see Nadira writing. Nadira, I do hope to, like I said, have you here again, perhaps next year once more when there are new films to discuss, new themes to discuss. For now, thank you so much for being on this show. I'll see you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was pleasure talking to you.